Okay. Thank you. Gamer Joba, which is hello in Georgian, and it means may you win. So may you all win, I guess. I'm Ana. I'm from Tbilisi, Georgia, and I have been a graphic designer for about 8 years. And then I realized that I was in love with letters, even though I said that I would never be a type designer because it's too much work. But so, yeah, I changed my mind, I guess. So yeah, I graduated from MATD here, and I'm very happy that I'm back. It was 2021. It was a bit tricky pandemic year, but yeah, it was a learning process, and I learned quite a lot, and I think that's the result there. So yeah, I'm going to go with the presentation, and I'll talk a bit about the background of Georgian script and show a few manuscripts because we have 3 scripts. We'll give you the key details about Georgian type, and then we'll move on to the 2 projects I have submitted, Nocturno and Adapter. Some of you might know that Georgia has 3 scripts, and they are coexisting even today. However, Mkhedruli and Mtavruli are mainly used for ecclesiastic texts. So this is the very first signs of Georgian Mkhedruli script, which was found in the 5th century. The left one is from Jerusalem, and the right one is from Georgia. It was the first sign of Georgian script, I guess. But then, of course, as everyone, we moved to the paper. And even though we had a lot of transitional styles, I decided to show this one example from the 10th century because I think it's a typical one with written with flat nib pen. And on this example, actually, you can see different 3 styles, one very decorative up there, one for the text, and another one for, let's say, drop caps, which is probably, written a bit differently because you can tell it has tiny serif-like things. The next was Nuskhuri, which appeared in the 9th century, but it was mainly used with Mkhedruli. And this combination is called actually Khutsuri. And here you can see, I'm going to get closer to the screen. Mkhedruli is used as a drop cap and also for emphasis purposes. The red part and the upper part is Mkhedruli and the lower part is Nuskhuri. So it was often used together and by, as I said, for ecclesiastic purposes. And the last one is Mkhedruli, which we still use today. And it first appeared in the 11th century, and from then on it went through a bit of transformations and got to this point, which you'll see is very close to the first printed book. A lot of times people cannot see the connection between the 3 scripts and they think it's a separate thing, but looking at it from the scribes or calligraphers' point of view, you can see throughout the centuries how one transitioned into the modern Mkhedruli. So even though it was like one script transitioning to another, we still have 3, which is very interesting, I think. And now on to the printed books. Before I show you the examples, I want to give you a bit of a historical context. Georgia had a lot of political instability throughout its existence, and unfortunately, even today. So development of typography might not have been the priority at the time because we had a lot of invasions. A lot of times, printing press was destroyed, so we have not kept anything from our first printing press. So it was a bit of a tough process. But at some point, when Byzantine Empire fell, it was our biggest ally. So Georgia decided to look for a new ally. And at the same time, Vatican was interested in extending their authority in East. So our ambassadors met with them. And even though politically it was not successful, it was very fruitful for Georgian typography. And this is the very first book printed in Georgian, which was printed in Rome. Along with Latin, you can see that Georgian has not gone through the development process it needs to go through. It was very new, and this started like more than a century later than in the rest of the world. But the interesting thing about this is that they had kept ligatures, a lot of them actually, and contextual alternates, which maybe unfortunately we don't use anymore because it could potentially make things more interesting. But yeah, it kind of makes sense because what they were referencing was just letters they had from the ambassadors and the king. The next development was the first press in Georgia, which actually was founded in 1709, but it was initially printing only in Mkhedruli and Mtavruli. And then they realized that they needed something that was for, let's say, regular people and easier to learn. So they started pushing Mkhedruli script as well. And here, actually, you can see that they tried to take more systematic approach to the design. They tried to remove ligatures, which they removed, actually, because I guess technically it was a bit difficult. But even because of even though they did some changes, it still looks like something that would be handwritten, and it's not very economical because of the proportions of the typeface. The X height is very small compared to the ascenders and descenders, and it creates a lot of space there. Next developments, yeah, that printing press actually did not last for long, right about 20 years, because it got destroyed by invasion of Ottomans. And the next developments happened in Russia, actually. At that time, there were a lot of Georgian nobility living there, and their main their business was connected to printing somehow. So they were trying to develop Georgian type as well. And you can gradually see how they are trying to make it more uniformal, but there are still a lot of issues, and it kind of looks like a typeface written by someone who does not know Georgian, to be honest. But the right one was very popular, and a lot of books were printed by it because that was the best option, I guess. And this one is very important because this influenced all the high contrast typefaces coming after this. I'm gonna say some weird names, I guess, but yeah. Teimuras Batonishvili and Marie Brossa, who was a French scholar, collaborated on this project. And on the left, you can see the first sketches of the draft they were gonna create. And on the right side, then you can see the finished product who was taken to St. Petersburg and then cast there. And this was the first time that bold weight appeared in Georgian. But throughout the history, we kind of always had this issue of having the full character set for the typeface. And you can probably see here with the bold weight that the last L is completely different typeface because they couldn't even typeset a small paragraph because they didn't have enough letters. So that issue has been ongoing through the history. This typeface, which was called akademiori, which means academic, was later developed into bigger size with small updates, again, in St. Petersburg. And a book, which is called Deda Ena, it means mother tongue, was printed with this typeface. And basically, you learned language, Georgian, through that book at school. So the name of the typeface kind of shifted, and it's called Deda Ena now, or some variations are called Gogebashvilis, who was the person who wrote the book for kids. And this now is probably one of the main changes in the Georgian typography. And yeah, I love to talk about this one. So at the time, again, political situation was tricky. And there was an intellectual movement who was united around liberal ideas, but also some national ideas, because they were trying to fight through Russification. And we had a lot of times where we barely contained our language because they tried to change and stop teaching it. So yeah, they were trying to help people to learn Georgian because it was a bit of a luxury for people you might know. So in this newspaper, they decided that they needed something new that corresponded to their ideas. So they had a contest, and out of 40 entrances, one typeface won, Mkhedruli's typeface. It was later cast in Vienna in 1864. And when they came back, they printed this newspaper. And that typeface is called Venuri, which means printed in Vienna, I guess. This newspaper is not only interested by the typeface Venuri, which corresponds to the technology of printing at the time and the proportions that Georgian needed to be legible, but also it's the first appearance of Mtavruli characters. And not to confuse them with Asom Mtavruli, Mtavruli characters look like Mkhedruli script, but they are designed between two lines. And that has caused a lot of confusion for Unicode, at least. So yeah, here, Mtavruli was used as a Western idea of capital letters. You could write header or title and first letter of every sentence and first letter of name and so on. So this was a bit of a, I don't know, trying to bring Western ideas into Georgian script, I guess, but in the end, it was helpful for Georgian typography, and we'll get to that. So this is Venuri in two weights, regular and bold. And here, you remember probably I mentioned we had issues with character sets. Even though Venuri was considered at the time the most completed typeface, you can see that numbers are from high contrast typeface. So there was an issue there. Now to compare all this printing typefaces. The last one is Venuri, and it's obvious that they tried to unify and systemize the process of the design. They increased the X height compared to the ascenders and descenders, and ascenders and descenders are almost the same size. So it could, on the other ones, you can see how long ascenders and descenders are, which created that big gaps between the lines, and it was non-economical and also maybe not as legible because it was slowing down the process and X height was quite small. Yeah, this is fun part where in 1950s and 40s, they decided and started having more systematic approach to type design and documenting the typefaces we had. So Beno Gordaziani created this catalog, which basically is probably the earliest example of a specimen in Georgia. And he documented all the typefaces that they had at the time, text and display. But also at this time, they tried to create a classification system for Georgian, which is quite interesting because it corresponded to the typefaces we had at the time, which was 4, actually, 4 text typefaces. But in today's reality, it is not that relevant. So I understand why they were trying it, but I think it needs an update. And we're not using it actually at all. Yeah, this one is probably the only book. Lado Grigolia was teaching also at the Tbilisi State Academy of Arts, and he had a lot of works that were discussing how to construct Georgian letters. And even though it was very important, I think it needs to be considered that this approach is very mathematical, and I think we have learned throughout the history that that approach does not work with the optical things we have to consider. So yeah, I don't think teaching type design with only this approach is going to be helpful. Now on to the digital type. I'm trying to be really quick. This was the first bitmap typeface created, which was 1980. I forgot to look at my notes. And I'm very bad with the dates as well. 87, I think. Yeah, 88, but the typeface was designed in 87, I think. Yeah, so you also can see the quality is not that bad, and it was not because of the typeface, but because of the printing technology. Unfortunately, we didn't have a laser printer at the time, so it's not quite good. But it was a, let's say, big step, and a lot of new stuff was going to be problematic, and we had to solve the issues. Which was actually before Unicode. If you wanted to see this on the screen, you would have to type this, which is Tuli Schrifti, just in Latin letters. And why is that? Because Georgian was not encoded, so we had to work around this and maybe create Georgian letters instead of Latin letters. And then we had issues where you would get a design file and it was all in English letters but Georgian text, and then the hunt for the typeface started. So that was a bit problematic, but we found our way around it. But then Unicode happened finally. But it was a slow process. Initially, they only added Mtavruli and Mkhedruli, which we use today. But the second update was needed to include Nuskhuri. And the reason was, for some reason, they thought Nuskhuri was another variant for Mkhedruli. And then Emerson sent them proposal to include Nuskhuri, and they had help from our church, where they provided documents that they needed both scripts because they used them in their books. Now, this was not the end of the issue, because Mtavruli letters still were not included in Unicode. This part was a bit trickier. So I'm going to go through the historical aspect of how we used capital letters and why it was necessary to have in Unicode. These examples are on the left. As we talked, Nuskhuri and Mtavruli were used together quite often. And on the right side, actually, you can see an early example of Mkhedruli, including Mtavruli letters. So some today think that the right way to use Mtavruli letters or capital letters is to write Mkhedruli and have old Mtavruli, the first letter of the sentence. However, this idea is not very popular, and I would agree with that. This approach was not systematic enough to think that, oh, we were using capital letters. But later, this is from the Georgian printing press in 700s, where now we are using Mtavruli as capital letters with Nuskhuri. And on the right side, it's 1823, if I'm not mistaken, in St. Petersburg, where they tried to implement the same idea. However, Mtavruli letters were not designed specifically for the purpose. They were just taken Mkhedruli letters, increased in size. And I think this is pretty obvious when you look at the proportions of letters. This is quite interesting, where so the author of these designs considered that he created Mtavruli characters, but there is not enough evidence that he's talking about Mtavruli as we know it today. So he might be talking just about the intertwined characters that are the same height, but he wrote it in his will, so who knows. This is again example from newspaper from 1864. And here you can see that capitals are in Mtavruli, also to amplify some words, and the first letters, as we said. Mtavruli became very popular. So on the first example, you can see that even though the typeface is high contrast, and not all of them had Mtavruli characters, Venuri Mtavruli is used here to emphasize the information. On the second example, you can now see Mtavruli used in text, which I don't think you see a lot today because it does not quite match with proportions. Maybe that's another issue where we have to solve it, but not yet, I guess. And on the right side, you can see this is actually from the Dedaena book for kids, and they were teaching kids that there exist capital letters and Mkhedruli lowercase letters, and they were supposed to use it like that. At some point, the idea of Mtavruli letters shifted more towards the lettering because not a lot of typefaces had Mtavruli letters, and they often needed to hire an artist to design a book cover or something. So it became very artistic. So even the idea of typeface design has warped a bit, and it turned into this decorative thing. But luckily there was Anton Dumbadze, who was the one who kind of brought back the focus to real type design. And I'm going to talk about him today. But luckily, the problem with Unicode, I think, was that they were trying to understand the issue from Western idea of what capital letter is. I think what they should have done is just research how typography works in a certain place, because it's not going to fit the certain ideas, because they thought it was alternative style like italic or bold, but Mtavruli also had italic and bold weight. So where does it fit now? So yeah, I think maybe they have guessed that they should have done, but yeah, focus more on the area and how typography works than the idea of how it should work. This is the full character, not full, let's say modern character set, which does not include Asom Mtavruli and Nuskhori, but it definitely, if you are going to design Georgian at some point, definitely have Mtavruli and accented characters that are used in other Kartvelian languages like Swanuri, Mingrelian, and Lazuri, because, yeah, they are necessary there. And yeah, now on to matching to scripts. As I said before, experience at MATD was a learning one, and I made probably the biggest mistake I shouldn't have done, but I learned it later, so we'll get to that part. While working on Nocturno, I knew that it was supposed to be a book typeface, let's say it that way. So I decided, okay, I'm going to research my home library, which is not small, and see what typefaces are used. So when I got into digging, I found out that this typeface designed by Anton Dumbadze, which is called Golkheti, is used in 80 or even 90% of the books. But then I was interested how it would use Latin and Georgian together. And then I found a surprise that they just used some high contrast typeface, which was not matching Georgian, not in weight, style, or even proportions. So that was interesting. And then I got to the second one, which is also literaturally designed by Anton Dumbadze. And here also, even though they are both high contrast, there are still proportion issues. Like Georgian looks very small. Also, Georgian has a lot of kerning issues in here. So yeah, even though I had an idea that it was not going well in the publishing industry, I understood how much they did not pay attention to what they were typesetting. So then I decided, because unfortunately in Georgia, the culture of buying a typeface is not non-existent now because they started doing it, but was non-existent. So they try to find something that is free. And we have one font site where you can dig through Georgian fonts, and most of them are quite a bad quality. And I found, let's say, digitized version of Kolkheti and Literaturuli. And proportions do not match at all. Weight does not match. And in case of Kolkheti, I actually found a typeface that looks exactly like that. So there are shady things going on there. But yeah, but I knew that Kolkheti was very popular because all those books were printed with it. So I had to consider the proportions because, first of all, maybe it formed reading habits. Maybe it was more legible for us now because we were all the time seeing it. So I had to consider it. But then I thought, okay, I should also consider what's modern or new and has better proportions. And Deja Vu is very popular in Georgia, and not a serif as well. So I analyzed their proportions as well. And here, well, I didn't talk about the previous slide's proportions because I don't think they are relevant since they are two different typefaces. Here you can see that in Deja Vu serif, X height is slightly lower, and ascender and descender are basically the same as in Latin. But in Noto serif, the proportions are exactly the same, which I think can be problematic because of the round and spacey shapes in Georgian. So from then on, I also had to consider ascenders and descenders and thinking like, okay, what proportion is proper? Because these two tell me have the same, and the other one tells me that it should be longer. And then looking at the X height, I realized that, okay, we have letters that cannot be identified through X height. So I cannot say the same as maybe some say about Latin, that it's the most important part, because there are a lot of defining ascenders and descenders. So I knew that I needed space for both. And yeah, this research translated not only into Nocturno, but also in Adapter, because I knew that that was for text as well. So what I did was I reduced the X height about 6% because that was the optimal. And then I had to take care of quite flowy and heavy serifs because it was making quite a dark mark on the paper, and Georgian is quite spacey as it is, so I had to make it darker. So in Georgian, the stroke and stem is a bit thicker than in Latin, and it gets the same texture on the paper. I would say something about Mtavruli proportions, but there is not enough research done, and it happened so that we designed them the same proportions as uppercase letters, which I don't know if right or wrong, but that's how it is right now, and maybe someone should research that. Yeah, in case of features that can be translated into Georgian, very first idea sometimes beginner designers have is to stick serifs everywhere. And historically, that does not work well. So in case of Georgian, you just have to find those tiny details that can repeat the movement in Georgian script as well, and just try to not mimic, but make it harmonious with Latin. And what I love about Nocturno is that I had a lot of fun designing italics. Even though Georgia has a very rich history of calligraphy, still initially the italic shapes were just slanted. And no one considered that they could adapt the concept of true italics because we had best information there. So what I did was I dipped into my calligraphy knowledge, and the process was like I would write on the paper some interesting characters and find what I can do differently than Roman type or upright. So here is how the some characters change into italic, and I'm very proud of some of these shapes, and I was very happy to work on this project for that reason. So in the end, we had this 4 weights and slant, but there were also display and stencil typeface, which is, I love that it's calligraphic, and it's very different from the next project I'm gonna share with you, which is Adapter Georgian. And yeah, so the proportions, once you realize how to figure that out, it's not it's not a lot of questions there, because now you know how to approach, but you have to consider the difference with the high contrast and low contrast typeface, right? So yes, proportions are still lower, of the X height, I mean, which already gives me longer ascenders. So now I have to take care and figure out how much longer my descenders should be. And then I knew that maybe these round and empty spaces create a lot of issue for me on the paper to get the same mark. But of course, it would not have to be as dark as high contrast typeface with serif. So I had to figure out how much I should add. And there's just 2-point difference there, but I think it still mattered. Yeah, again, here, some tiny details that you can repeat, and I think it's a bit more difficult on low contrast typefaces because it's very uniformal and somehow you have to still show the character. So it was just tiny things like connecting points with the vowels, or slightly, very slightly angled counters, and yeah, cut of the line and stuff like that. It was, yeah, not italic, but slanted design was not quite the same process, because it was not true italic, but slanted version, and it needed to be because it is a fully variable type, so you can switch between slant as well. And yeah, this is a final product, and 16 fonts, I guess, and anything you want to choose in between. And I think this type is already working well, because I know companies that started buying this, and I hope that that's a sign that we're learning that we need to pay for work, someone else's work. And yeah, that's it. Madloba. And I also